Hello, welcome to this NET Back to Basics video focusing today on AQA Literature Paper 1, Section B. Now the idea in all these videos is we're going to talk through a really simple summary version of the key points about the question, and we'll do it as quickly and as straightforwardly as possible. Now today we're going to focus on A Christmas Carol as a novel or a novella, and on Scrooge as a character, and how we'd approach a question about those things. As a quick recap of Literature Paper 1, the whole paper lasts an hour and 45 minutes, and that's about 2 hours 10 minutes if you have that 25% extra time. The paper is split into two halves. The first half is on the Shakespeare text that you studied, the second is on the 19th century novel that you've looked at. Now for most students watching this, that means it's going to be either Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, and it'll be followed by A Christmas Carol. Now simplifying a bit, section B is worth 30 marks, and because you spent 55 minutes on section A, you've got about 50 minutes left for section B. To simplify even more, you're more or less simply splitting this exam in half. For the 19th century question, there's going to be a whole range of questions on different texts. Now you want to be finding the one that's on A Christmas Carol, and that's usually around page 13. As with the Shakespeare section, there's only one question on the text, so there is no choice about this, I'm afraid. Now again, at the top of the extract, there's always information telling you where the extract's from and what's happening, and at the bottom of the extract, you're then given the actual question. Now the question always starts with something along the lines of starting with, and that's a reminder to talk about the extract on the page and about the text as a whole. You're then asked about how the writer presents something. Now as with the Shakespeare section, it could be a character, it could be a combination of characters, it could be a theme, an idea, and it could be a setting. Now the setting one is unusual, but it's not impossible. As with the Shakespeare section, whether the question is on a theme or a character doesn't really matter. It's nothing to worry about. A question about a character is also a question about themes, and a question about themes is also a question about characters. So that means there's no need to be scared of either. You're given bullet points, as ever, which essentially remind you to talk about the extract and the whole text, and then tell you the marks. Now, again, there are 30 marks for this question, and you're marked on those four things. First of all, your ideas about the task and about the extract and how you explain them. Secondly, your choice of quotations and how you use them. Thirdly, how you talk about the writer's choices, their techniques, their methods, their features, and the effect that those things have. And lastly, how you discuss the big ideas in the text and how you talk about the context as well. In terms of the essay as a whole, you're probably going to write, again, about 4 to 6 paragraphs in total. And that's going to be made up of, essentially, 2 to 3 from the extract and 2 to 3 from the text as a whole. Now, good advice is, again, to follow the story from the start to the end. So if the extract comes from the beginning of the text, then start with the extract, then talk about the middle of the text, and then talk about the end of the text. If the extract comes from the middle of the text, then talk about the beginning of the text to begin with, then do the extract, and then do the end. And if the extract's from the end, then talk about the start and middle of the whole text, and then do the extract. And again, on that third option there, if the extract's from the end of the text, it's worth throwing in a few references earlier on. In terms of the extract, you tend to find, again, that it's been chosen deliberately so that it starts somewhere important and it ends somewhere significant as well. And what that means is that you're probably going to find a useful quotation somewhere near the beginning of it and another one somewhere near the end of it. In terms of what we can prepare in advance, now we can't know in advance what extract you're going to be given from the novel. We don't know in advance which character it'll focus on, we don't know what theme it will link to. However, since A Christmas Carol is a novel that's built entirely around Scrooge and his journey to redemption, that means that essentially every question, fundamentally, comes down to being a question about Scrooge. So if the question's about a character who isn't Scrooge, there'll definitely be someone linked to him, someone compared to him, someone contrasted with him, so he's always safe to talk about. Also, if it's not Scrooge, the character they give you will have to be in the extract, and that means you can simply use the extract for the character and link in Scrooge from the rest of the text. It also means there are certain themes you'll almost definitely be able to talk about, because they're the big-hitting themes to do with Scrooge, and also because the entire novel really is Dickens trying to make a series of social points. So things like poverty and the way we treat the poor, the dangers and the impact of greed, the importance of friends and family, the importance of Christmas, the nature of the supernatural, of belief, and so on. So if I've got a series of quotations tracking Scrooge as a character throughout the novel, and that I know what I'll say about, I'm probably as safe as I can be. I'd have to adapt it to fit whatever the question was, but I know I'd have things that would pretty much always be relevant. Now, as a minor note, you'll spot that I'm calling the text either a novel or a novella. Now, a novella is just a short novel. There isn't really a clear definition of exactly what that means or when one becomes the other. There are some people who get very animated about calling it one or the other. I'm not one of them. So, moving on. Obviously, there isn't necessarily a single way of approaching this, but for me, this might be my basic Scrooge essay. So I'll start at the beginning of the text that Scrooge is unsympathetic at the beginning and he ignores the poor. And the quotation could be something along the lines of, if they'd rather die, they better do it and decrease the surplus population. And that's Scrooge in stave 1. I'd then go for possibly the end of stave 1 and the idea that Marley's punishment after death foreshadows Scrooge's fate. And the quotation, I wear the chain I forged in life, I made it link by link. And that's Marley in stave 1. I then might go back to stave 2 and the idea that Scrooge as an adult is the result of his childhood and of his choices. And the quotation, the school is not quite deserted, said the ghost. A solitary child neglected by his friends is left there still. And that's a Ghost of Christmas Past in stave 2. I'd then bring it into the present, I think, and talk about Tiny Tim in stave 3. And the idea that Tiny Tim is the exact opposite of Scrooge, that he is the antithesis of Scrooge, but also that he's an innocent victim. And the quotation could be, God bless us everyone, said Tiny Tim, the last of all. And then I think might go for the end of the text. Maybe the beginning of the final stave. Scrooge has to accept his past, he has to live in the present and consider the future. And the quotation could be, I will live in the past, the present and the future. And that's Scrooge at the start of stave 5. And then the idea that he's been changed by his experiences. And a quotation along the lines of, I'm as light as a feather, as happy as an angel, as merry as a schoolboy, as giddy as a drunken man. And that's Scrooge in stave 5. Now what that means is that my basic line of discussion would be along the lines of this. So at the beginning of the novel, Scrooge is unsympathetic and ignores the poor, and Marley's punishment after death foreshadows Scrooge's future. We learn in stave 2 that Scrooge as an adult is a result of his childhood and of his choices, and Scrooge is shown as being the antithesis of Tiny Tim, the opposite of Tiny Tim in stave 3, with Tiny Tim as an example not just of being an opposite to Scrooge, but as an innocent victim of Scrooge's actions. To be redeemed, Scrooge has to accept his past, live in the present, and consider the future, and by the end, Scrooge has been changed by his experiences. Now, obviously, there's numerous other quotations I could use, either from Scrooge or about Scrooge, but those I think would be a good basic spine to my discussion, and I'd link in some others as I went, perhaps. Now that works as a structure because it covers the entire text from the start to the end. It links in some of the big ideas, the big concepts, big themes, and it also connects with some of the other key characters. Now what I'm going to do next is take one of those quotations and just run through what I'd say about it as a bit of a model. Now my point for the beginning here would be that Scrooge is unsympathetic at the start and that he ignores the poor. And my quotation would be, as you can see, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. And that's from Scrooge in stave 1. Now, Scrooge clearly here thinks that the poor should simply be allowed to die, and he implies that it's a choice they're making, that it's their own fault. I think, about, as a feature, the semantic field of economics in the references to decrease, surplus, and population. And what they do is make it sound almost like a maths problem. And it ignores the fact that these are people, not just numbers. Along those lines, I'd zoom in on the pronoun they, which here suggests that Scrooge sees them as an anonymous group rather than as being individuals, and that as a result, they're easier for him to ignore. I make a link, I think, to stave 3 and that line where the Ghost of Christmas Present comments to Scrooge that if he be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. And essentially the idea that the ghost is confronting Scrooge with the horrific reality of his earlier words. It does link to the views of Thomas Malthus, of course, that Victorian economist. Scrooge is essentially echoing or paraphrasing Malthus so that Dickens can show his readers, I suppose, how awful those views are. What Dickens intends here is for Scrooge to be seen as unsympathetic to others, and also unsympathetic in the sense of us being difficult to sympathise with. He ignores problems and he depersonalises the poor. Now that, for me, would be the first paragraph of an essay that I could centre on Scrooge. But obviously it would depend on the question, and obviously it would also depend on where the extract came from. On that note, let's look at how we'd apply that to an essay question. Now I can see from the top of this one that the extract is from stave 1, and it tells me that Scrooge has been confronted by the ghost of Jacob Marley. Now looking at the question itself, I can see I'm being asked to write about the theme of action and consequence. And since Scrooge is in the extract, I think I'm more or less going to focus my essay on him. It seems easiest. Possibly along with a link to Marley, because he's also kind of a focus of this extract. Now I need 2 to 3 quotations from this extract to talk about. And again, you often find there's something useful at the beginning of it and something useful at the end of it, and I may also pick something from the middle. So I might talk about, for example, Marley's comment that each spirit that didn't walk abroad in life is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share but might have. I might then go for Marley's explanation that I wear the chain I forged in life, I made it link by link, and the third one, possibly Scrooge's plea to Marley to tell me more, speak comfort to me, Jacob. Now, thinking about the essay on Scrooge that I've already got mapped out, I'm probably going to use, I think, my first paragraph, then slot in a couple from the extract, and then use my last few from my original plan. And that would mean it looked something like this on the screen. So first of all, that Scrooge is unsympathetic at the start and ignores the poor, and he's ignorant as to the impact of his choices and actions. And if they'd rather die, they better do it, decrease the surface population. Right, that one. Then I go to the extract. So it's clear from Marley that this kind of thinking and behaviour will have consequences even after death. And the quotation, doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share but might have. Again, I think I'd go for the extract and the idea that Marley's fate foreshadows Scrooge's, that if he doesn't change, he'll be trapped. I wear the chain I forged in life, I made it link by link. Then I'd go into, I think, stave 3, into the present, and this idea of him being confronted in stave 3 by Tiny Tim, who is an innocent victim of Scrooge's actions and those like him, but also still a figure of kind of gratitude and happiness. And that quotation, God blesses everyone, said Tiny Tim the last of all. I then think I'd go for the end of the text and the idea that in order to change, Scrooge has to accept his past, live in the present, and also see the impact that he's having, and then also consider the future and the consequences of his actions. And that quotation, I will live in the past, the present, and the future. And then to round it off, end of the text, by the end, Scrooge has been changed by his experiences, and he and society face a brighter future as a result. And that quotation, light as a feather, happy as an angel, merry as a schoolboy, as giddy as a drunken man. And the light as a feather thing linking as a contrast to Marley being weighed down by the chains. Now for a different extract, I might have used 3 quotations from the extract and 3 from my original plan. Again, it works either way. Now obviously whatever I choose from the extract, I do need to make sure I talk about features, zoom in on words, make links, make connections, and that sort of thing. And obviously, whatever I keep from my original essay, I've got to make sure that I nudge, I tweak to make it fit the question. In terms of top tips, nothing surprising. First of all, answer the correct question. Make sure you're answering on the right text and that you're answering the correct question. Secondly, spend 50 minutes answering it, or around 60 up to 65 if you have extra time. Have points and quotations about Scrooge as a character ready. It's always safe to have those. Read the question carefully. Look for when the extract is from, look at what's happening, and look at the focus of the question itself. Choose 2 to 3 quotations from the extract, and remember there's usually something useful at the start and at the end of it. And lastly, write your essay chronologically. Now, there's other ways of doing it, but that is a way that works, and then just building in the extract wherever it fits. As ever, if you are looking for aiming higher, the advice is the same. First of all, focus on the depth and the range. Secondly, yes, focus on analysis. It is important, really important. But, and again, as ever, you're not necessarily marked higher for discussions around obscure technical features. It's the effect and the impact that's important. Showing that you understand how the whole text slots together is very useful. So making links and connections as you go is a good idea. Again, consider multiple layers of meaning. So it's a chain that he forged. Is it relevant with the word forged, for example? Is it giving connotations of dishonesty? You forge from metal. So is this part of that focus on money, coinage, locks and lockboxes, on metal items? That kind of idea. Another point, try to give your essay cohesion. Emphasize how your ideas follow on from each other and cover the entire text. Now again, and as ever, context can be useful, but thematic discussions focus on ideas. That's far more likely to gain you higher marks. Now Thomas Malthus is a prime example of this. It's useful to reference, it's relevant, of course it is, but it's Scrooge you should be writing about. They're not looking for an essay on Malthusian economics. The same applies to, say, the influence of Manchester on Dickens' depiction of London, or of the influence of Dickens' childhood on his presentation of Scrooge. It's useful as a reference. It is a thing that is there, but it's what's in the text that's the most important thing to focus on. Right, hopefully that's been useful, prompted some ideas, some thinking, and so on. As ever, please remember that there's a whole range of videos covering every other language question and the other literature texts as well on the NET Back to Basics YouTube channel, as well as hundreds of other videos covering every other topic you could possibly dream of to do with English. Thank you very much for your time today, and look after yourselves.